This podcast continues Chapter 5, Moving, Lifting, and Transporting Patients. And specifically, we want to look at how we can use power grip and power lift if we have a patient on a device and demonstrate moves for where there is not a spinal injury and if we suspect a spinal injury. Also, we'll consider urgent moves in which the patient or ourselves could be in danger. Finally, we'll look at devices for lifting and moving patients, such as backboards and scoop stretchers. For moving a patient, we can define a move as transporting a patient from one location to another. Could be simple, just lifting a patient from a toboggan to perhaps a bed in the first aid room, or it could be several feet. If we have an urgent move, that's probably because ourselves or the patient are in danger. A more controlled move might involve our teammates. A lift is exactly what it sounds like, raising the person from a lower position, say a toboggan on the snow, to perhaps, say, an ambulance gurney when we hand them off to EMS. A drag is that means of moving a patient along the ground, and a carry is actually lifting and moving the patient without their assistance. To begin with, make sure that you're maximizing your anatomical ability to hold on to the device that you're working with. A power grip uses your hands wrapped underneath the device and allows you to exert the tightest grip on that device with constant contact with the object. A power lift uses good body mechanics and the strong leg muscles with a straight back to ensure your safety. Now, patient moves without spinal protection are the following. Let's look. The extremity lift is for a responsive patient without a spinal injury. We see that one rescuer or patroller can take a hold of the legs. The second patroller can reach under the armpits and grasp the wrists, and the two patients together can lift the patient perhaps onto a transport device such as a backboard or a gurney. Not recommended if the patient is very heavy and might require more than two patrollers. A direct ground lift would be perhaps more useful for a patient who is larger. We see we're making good choices with the smaller patroller towards the patient's feet, a larger patroller at the heavier part of their body, and the patient is placed supine, flat on their back. All of the rescuers will get in place and ensuring good body mechanics, perhaps on one knee so they can use the strong leg muscles, they'll stand and lift the patient. The bean lift, that's an acronym for Body Elevation and Non-Movement, is formerly known as a bridge lift. We see patrollers alternating along the side of the patient, and their shoulders are in contact with each other with their arms underneath. By driving their hips forward, their shoulders will actually bridge above the patient. This is a super efficient way to lift a patient, especially one that's larger. It also keeps the patient properly aligned and protects their spine. When the patient is elevated, then backboard can be slid underneath. If you suspect a spinal injury, we have a couple of other moves that we can execute. One is to use a draw sheet. We see a flexible sheet or a blanket placed under the patient. The sides get rolled up to form an improvised handle, and then the lift is accomplished with patrollers on each side, grasping that improvised handle and lifting the patient off the ground. Be very aware for larger patients, you want to ensure that the fabric doesn't rip. Oftentimes, we'll proceed this way by log rolling a patient, and the key to this is maintaining the spine in proper alignment. We see patrollers lined up on the side of the patient with one at the head who will direct the move and ensure that the neck stays in line with the spine. The best way to execute this is to grab at that strong bony structure surrounding the shoulder girdle, and around the pelvis as well. We see the patroller in the middle has his left hand on the patient's pelvis. Together, they will roll the patient towards themselves, keeping the spine in alignment. If you suspect a pelvic fracture, log rolling is not recommended. Pelvic fractures are very unstable, and if bleeding has begun to become controlled through clotting, log rolling can disturb that clot and endanger the patient more. In that case, after the pelvic fracture has been stabilized with what we see here, a SAM sling or a pelvic binder, we can execute the bean lift that we saw previously, body elevation and non-movement. There are other moves that we can execute. Always, if we need to move a patient, make sure that you protect them and do not allow them to be dropped. An urgent move is one where perhaps there's a life-threatening hazard that can potentially affect either you as the rescuer or your patient. Most of the time, these moves are what we call long axis drags. Move along the long axis of the patient's body, essentially their spinal column. For a shoulder drag, bend down on one knee, support their head with your forearms, and grab the patient's clothing at the shoulders. Drag the patient along that long axis to where they need to be. Similarly, you can work from the other end. You can do a feet drag. You want to bend down on one knee, grab their feet or ankles, and then, keeping their spine aligned as best you can, drag the patient to the desired location. Without grabbing their feet, you could use a rope or a sheet, as is demonstrated here. A blanket drag is similar. If the patient happens to be on a blanket or a draw sheet, again, you can move them along their long axis, along the surface of the snow or the floor, as we see here. Pull the blanket to the desired location that's safe. One last possibility is the underarm wrist drag. We saw this before when we looked at the extremity carry. The person at the head can reach under the patient's armpits and grab their wrists. Then you can move from a kneeling to a standing position and drag the patient on their heels to the desired location, supporting their torso and their head. Now, a non-urgent move is a controlled move. We see, for example, here, the human crutch. Perhaps I have a patient with a lower leg injury and I need to assist them into the aid room or perhaps even to their vehicle. A two-person assist is similar as well. And then the fore and aft carry is essentially using the extremity lift to move the patient from one spot to another. In summary, as a ski patroller or a bike patroller, your patients who are injured are going to have to be moved. Be careful and protect yourself. Get help if you need it, because that patient package can be up to 300 pounds by the time you include your medical equipment. You're also going to be working on uneven terrain or slippery terrain such as ice or snow. Be safe.